So Trey Lance got the start for the Niners yesterday, and
it's rocky. Ups and downs.
Didn't go all that well. The touchdown he did throw, as Eddie Garcia mentioned it earlier, it was a bad throw. It was nearly intercepted, then landed in the arms of a 49er, and it ended up being a touchdown pass. But it's kind of wild to think he's now in a spot after they gave up all of that to compete with Sam Darnold, who looked okay for the backup job in San Francisco. Just the whole thing's crazy, and I don't think Trey Lance probably comes out of that game yesterday and feels totally confident that he's going to be the number 2 guy moving forward. So there's the latest on.
You got that one,
Trey
Q.
Lance.
I mean, look, I've said this and will continue to say this. He just needs more time, more development. And when Sam Darnold goes in there, things seem to run rather smooth, and it's in part because he's played a lot, right? He's been now with 2 different organizations. He's been in multiple systems. He can adapt, and he's doing his best just to kind of survive and provide an opportunity to maybe be the guy this year when Brock Purdy's not there, or if he gets hurt. And so I think we know what he is bringing to the table. I said this last week, LaVar, and you were gone. I think if Darnold gets a shot and opportunity, I think he'll play well in that system. It's hard for quarterbacks not to typically play well in that system. For Trey, it's tough, though, because he just hasn't played a ton of football. And he was never drafted for what he had done or what he showcased. He was always drafted based on his potential. And unfortunately, because of the injury last season and the way things have kind of shaken out for him so far in his career, he just hasn't had the opportunity to really get the type of real playing experience that I think he needs to be where San Francisco wants him to be as an organization, to be where the fans want him to be, and to honestly be where I think the media thinks he should be. I keep going back to the fact that he only started 1 year of college football. That was, 4 years ago now?
Mm-hmm. Makes sense.
I mean, it's tough to think that a guy is going to be able to come in and be the type of player he ultimately needs to be when he's missed time due to injury or he hasn't been playing, due to whatever the circumstances were, like, COVID, for example, back in 2020 when he was in college. And then even once he got drafted into the league, there's still been some varying issues as to whether or not he's ready. I think he was always going to be viewed as a project, and anyone who didn't see that, probably was, being wishful about, what they thought he could be. I don't know who the comps were for him and all that. I hate when that comes around during draft time. I think it's the stupidest thing in the world because everyone's unique in their own way and they've had their own path to get to that point. But a lot of people want to take a big quarterback who's got a live arm, who's athletic, and they say, he's the next Josh Allen. You hear that all the time. Like, we try to make quarterbacks in every draft class into, he's Patrick Mahomes, he's Joe Burrow, he's Josh. They're their own people. Like, those guys, I'm not saying it's disrespectful to Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, and Patrick Mahomes. It just doesn't make sense to compare to them. And so for Trey Lance, he's just a guy who needs more game reps. And, whether it's preseason or once he gets into the regular season, I'm not sure he's going to be where they need him to be to ultimately say, like, this is going to be a team that's going to be able to compete for a conference title. And I think that's where they feel like they were at with this roster.
Dead man walking.
That's why when you made the point, we were talking with Albert Breer, and Brady's thought was, and you've said this before, that Aaron Rodgers was plan A, and that Trey Lance ended up being plan B. It makes sense when you think, all right, he's a raw talent, but they were in win-now mode. So why would you draft somebody who's a project if you're in win-now mode? And it just feels like Brock Purdy got there. Trey Lance had his opportunity to start. It was a monsoon. It was a rough go for everybody. Then he gets to game 2 last year, suffers the injury, and that's a wrap.
Neither one of them played well enough to be looked at as the starter, and that's what's damning. Like, they may be started, like they may be competing for starting position. I guess there were some reports that maybe Purdy isn't as far along as they would like, or maybe he's having a little bit of trouble or something to that effect.
The report was that he struggled in joint practices with the Raiders this week.
Yeah,
whatever that means.
Whatever that means, I don't know. But I will say this: it still works to Brock Purdy's advantage as to what the lasting memory of what he was able to do and what didn't happen when he went out injured. And that was based off of Garoppolo. You know, you came in and took over for Garoppolo. You didn't come in and take over for Trey Lance. Trey Lance has still not established that he's the guy. And I don't know. And listen, it's preseason. So it's hard to say you're going to cast a strong judgment on a player in the preseason just because of how vanilla they played during the game. Like we heard C.J. Stroud come out and say, listen, I've been doing a lot of great things in practice. You know, one interception doesn't change, you know, doesn't ruin everything. Like he kind of said it did ruin everything. But the point is that I don't know that we should be judging him so hard or so harshly in the preseason. But with that being said, he's in a position, Trey Lance is in a position where the preseason and any other snap, every snap Trey Lance gets, you have to assume has some type of value connected to it. He's gotta show his value, whether it's in practice, whether it's in the games. He has to show that value because he hasn't established himself as the undisputed quarterback of this team. And that's a tough road to hoe, especially when you got a guy of the quality of what's Darnold behind him. You know, you have Darnold that, you know, he like you said, Q, under this offensive scheme, you take a lot of pressure off of a quarterback in these situations because Kyle Shanahan knows how to run the ball. He knows how to get the ball to the different players, and he knows how to find a rhythm offensively, you know, that is suitable to and conducive to success for your quarterback. So now the question is, why can't Trey Lance have that same amount of success? And it's probably because of the lack of experience and the lack of development up to this point over the time that he's been a pro.
So when they were so bullish on Brock Purdy coming back from the injury, and they'd been consistent throughout the whole offseason, you know, Brock will be back, he'll be our starter. Brock's going to be back, he'll be our starter. Do you think part of that was that they've probably seen, although they haven't seen enough in games, but they've probably seen Lance in practice and have thought, yeah, that's not it. Brock Purdy's our guy. And maybe that's all that they're going on. And it just makes me wonder if that's the case and they already have a thought about what he is as a quarterback and it's not Brock Purdy, that there's a real chance that Trey Lance will never start another game for the 49ers. And they traded away 3 first-round picks for him. It's kind of wild, man. and they're going to survive it and still be a Super Bowl contender. That's how good the roster is. It's just crazy to think about how everything changed for Trey Lance over the past year, I would say.
What does that look like for the future? Like, is he trade bait? Is he cut? Like, what? How does that look? What does that look like? And then how does that, like, for what it's worth, how do you grade John Lynch on making this pick? Like, you still have to grade him on using a top draft pick on a quarterback, and that quarterback did not work. I mean, some GMs lose their jobs. Coaches lose their jobs over stuff like this.
Yeah, but if you have the guy you also drafted behind him, I mean, it's kind of like people forget about that, right? I mean, if Brock Purdy ends up being the guy. Now, if Purdy ends up not being the guy, or they find themselves at a ceiling, which – I've tried to temper San Francisco 49ers fans only because you're kind of saying to yourself, like, let's just hold off for a second. Let's let the young man play more. Let's see how things go. We've seen a lot of quarterbacks play really, really well in this system. And all I'm curious to see is at some point, if San Francisco gets to a point where they feel like they've hit a ceiling with him. Again, Trey Lance, that draft pick, it's a different prospect. That's a guy they took because of the upside, the talent, all the the physical attributes. They didn't take Brock Purdy in the first round. Like, this isn't like me saying this. This is obvious. I'm putting something out that when you look at how this thing could play out down the road, if they end up eventually saying, like, well, we kind of hit our ceiling here with Brock Purdy, well, it's because he doesn't have the things that they saw in Trey Lance to want to take him at that number 3 overall spot.
You'd have to assume he doesn't have very much runway either. because of where he was drafted. If he shows that he can't get it done, or if that ceiling looks like it's close in sight, you can't assume that he's going to get a lot of time to be able to prove one way or the other that that's what it's going to be. Like, you get your opportunity, right?
I mean, it's a 7th round pick. There's not that big of an investment into him.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible.